I'm super excited to be adding my voice to this whole discourse around transformational feminist leadership and why we need it more than ever now. I love the fact that this conference, there'll be a diverse panel, and which means a lot to me as an African woman, because many a times you'd realize that African women's voices are rarely heard. So it's a beautiful thing that we are also adding our voices to this discourse. So I've been asked to speak to this issue, something that I'm very passionate about. And I like to tell people that if it wasn't for the feminists, if it wasn't for our ancestors, we wouldn't be where we are today as women in general. The work that they did in terms of challenging patriarchy, the work that they did in terms of holding our society as a collective, also contributing to the liberation struggle of the different countries in Africa. So I really, really acknowledge and appreciate. And then this brings me to my presentation. Why are we talking about transformational feminist leadership now? And not just leadership in general. And I want to first refer to a report that was published by the World Economic Forum on the global gender gap, where they highlighted that we are likely, and our children are likely not to see gender parity. And this will be attained, this will not be attained for 99.5 years. And that's something for us to think about. And it's something that really worries me on a daily basis. And what it means is that we need to rethink our leadership style. We need to rethink our ways of being. We need to rethink how we see things, and also how we behave. And that's one of the things that transformational feminist leadership does. It's an approach that offers us that opportunity, that offers us the tools and the strategies in terms of analyzing our ways of being. And I'll start by saying that when you look at transformational feminist leadership, it starts with the personal. So it's not just about leadership in the public spaces. It's not just about leadership in your individual organization and so forth, but it's your own personal leadership. So it also gives you the tools and strategies in terms of analyzing your way of being as an individual. And I think if I look back into my leadership journey, the tools, the strategies, the concepts, the conversations and everything that we've had within the feminist movement, they've really made a huge difference in my life. I grew up in a very patriarchal society, a society where women, just like children, you're scared. A society where leaders do not respect human rights, the basic human rights, for instance, access to health services, access to quality education. So because of that, it had a way of how it shaped me as a human being. And I guess it's something that I used to tell my family that, you know, as I'm sick and tired of this, and I need to do something. I need to do something. And that's what transformational feminist leadership does. It pushes you to challenge your ways of being. It pushes you to challenge the different systems and structures that continue to perpetuate gender inequality or social injustices. So at a personal level, I'll speak to a few things that transformational feminist leadership has offered to me. It has offered me a space to analyze my own power and privilege as an individual. I am a young woman who's educated. I had the privilege of going to school. I have the privilege of working. I have a job, and so forth. And you'd realize that there's some young women out there that do not even know what a classroom looks like, that do not even know what Twitter is, and so forth. So it's to say that what transformational feminist leadership also taught me was for me to also be aware of the power and privilege that I have and how I use that power and privilege in the different spaces that I am engaged in or involved in. So it's also to say that how do I also use my power and privilege to extend the table and ensure that I enable other young women that are not as privileged as me to be in the different spaces of decision making, to be in different spaces. Like, for instance, right now, we are having this whole conference where we are dissecting different issues. So it's to say to what extent do I also use my power and privilege to extend the table and bring in more young women, bring in more women, bring in more people in their diversities, regardless of their class, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their religious thinking, and so forth. So that's one of the things. And the other thing that I also want to speak to is the issue of self-care and collective care. Last year in March, we were put under lockdown. Most of the countries across the globe where they went under lockdown, and it had a huge impact on my mental health. But because I also had a very strong support system that continued to reach out to me, that shared with me different tools on how I could navigate and cope with that disruption that COVID came with. So that's one of the things that transformational feminist leadership brings as an approach to us on the table, to say that in as much as we are changing systems, in as much as we are driving change and so forth, we also need to really take care of ourselves as individuals, take care of your well-being. How are you feeling in that cup that is always pouring outside, that is always marching on the streets and saying, oh, we want equal pay, or we want gender responsive public services, and so forth. So that's the beauty about the approach itself, that it also enables you to have that conversation. It also enables you to be in a space where you are able to think about your well-being, come up with those different self-care tools, strategies. Point that if you look at transformational feminist leadership, it's not something that started now. Our ancestors used to do most of these things that we are talking about these days. For instance, collective care. So it's also even for us to say, let's go back and learn from our stories and learn from our grandmothers, from our grandparents, how they managed to build their communities. As Africans, that whole philosophy of Ubuntu, how then do we sit and take care of each other as a collective, as a community, so that at the end of the day, we all flourish and we all thrive, in as much as we are facing all these difficulties. So at a personal level, that's what transformational feminist leadership does. It enables you to have those conversations, it enables you to question your power and privilege, and so forth. And then coming into the public space, I'd want to point out to the fact that if you look at our current situation right now, the society that we're living in, right now we we have the COVID-19 pandemic. There's the issue of climate change that has affected so many countries, especially countries in the global south. You have issues to do with an increase in gender-based violence, an increase in conflicts and so forth. So what transformational feminist leadership does then is that it also provides us that opportunity for us to sit down and try to analyze the root causes of some of these things that we are talking about. I'll speak to the issue of climate change. Many a times when you talk about climate change or even climate action, the discourse itself, you'd realize that people from the global south are really in those spaces where these critical conversations take place. So it's also for us to say that it's about time for us to move the center. It's about time for us to redistribute in terms of power, because there's so many power imbalances. You look at when it comes to funding itself, to all these initiatives that are being made around climate action, many a times the locally based solutions are not given that much recognition. So it's about time for us to also challenge that way of being and saying, you know what, it's about time we recognize the locally based solutions in terms of addressing these issues. And it's also one thing that if you look at the aid sector, many a times we tend to come up with all these initiatives, and there's that top-down approach. So what transformational feminist leadership does is that it also enables us to have those difficult conversations in terms of, can we also shift power? Can we also, at the end of the day, have shared leadership so that even if it comes to a proposal development, we also need to ensure that we are involving the communities that we are saying these are the communities that we want to support. Because what colonialism did was that it also erased our ways of producing knowledge. It erased our knowledge production systems. So this is the time for us to say and recognize the fact that for example, if you're looking at Indigenous women, they know the challenges that they're facing, and they are the ones that have the sustainable solutions that will enable us to articulate all these challenges that we are facing. So that's what transformational feminist leadership does, enabling us to have that conversation that can we analyze the different power structures? Who has the power? Where does power lie? Can we use that power to ensure that we bring those that are on the margins to the center? Can we redistribute the power itself so that at the end of the day, it's not that top-down approach? And then also the issue around different conversations that people are not willing to have. You talk about racism, you talk about capitalism, you talk about religious fundamentalism, and so forth. So what transformational feminist leadership does is that it also offers us those strategies and pushes us that now more than ever, it is the time for us to be bold enough to have those uncomfortable conversations. Of course, conversations that will make us cry, but if that also means it will take us to where we want, so be it. So those are some of the things that transformational feminist leadership does. But then you'd realize that there's a lot of backlash that has been happening. The moment you say I identify as a feminist, the moment you say I believe in the feminist principles and so forth, there's always that pushback to say that, oh, this is just a Western concept. But look at our history as African women. Look at the women in Dahomey women. Look at Nana from Ghana. Look at Nandipa from South Africa and our very own Buyane from Zimbabwe, the different roles that they played contributing to the liberation struggle, the different contributions that they made in changing the different power imbalances. So that's another thing for us to also think about. But then the beauty about feminist leadership, what it also does, that it calls for collective action. So in as much as you are coming in with your expertise, you're coming in with your skills, you're coming in with your knowledge and so forth. But then what it does, that it recognizes the power in numbers. So it calls for collective actions, bold collective actions for us to that will push us to where we want to be at the end of the day. And I think it's something that we have seen working from the different movements that have been taking place globally. You have the Zimbabwean Lives Matter, you have the Me Too, you have the Black Lives Matter, you have the AIDS too, and so forth. So just to say that transformational feminist leadership also says that we also need to ride on the potentiality of collective organizing, of collective mobilization, of movement and so forth, for us to challenge the different powers, for us to shift the power imbalances. Because if you look at most of our challenges that we are facing, it's boils down to the issue of the power imbalances. If you look at countries in the global south, I'll speak to Zimbabwe, I'll speak about Uganda and so forth. You'd realize that most of our structures right now, as we speak, most of our governance structures, not just governance structures, but even our social structures, they're structures that were built on colonialism. So it's also for us to have those conversations and say, you know what, we need to uproot, because colonialism also came with its own things, especially when you're looking at power, what it means to be in power, or what power means in terms of controlling of the economy, in terms of controlling of sexuality, in terms of control over our knowledge production system. So we also need to uproot, we also need to analyze those different structures, and say we need to decolonize all our systems. We also need to decolonize the education systems. Our curriculum, if you look at them, very, very colonial, if I may put it that way, and they're not addressing some of the issues that we're facing right now. So those are some of the things that what transformational feminist leadership provides us, especially this year in 2021. We are coming from 2020. We had so many challenges. COVID is still here. There are new variants and so forth. Climate change, it's becoming worse. So for me, I think it's very critical and important for us to write on some of the tools and the strategies that transformational feminist leadership as an approach provides us, because you realize that we live in a very male-dominated patriarchal society as a whole. So, and the type of leadership that we have is very toxic. It's a leadership that that does not believe in shared leadership. It does not believe in consulting people. And it just believes in doing whatever it is that pleases them, and there's no accountability, there's no transparency, and so forth. I mean, you can imagine, just look at the different member states, how they responded to COVID-19. What that their response, what it did was it exacerbated some of the challenges that we are facing. Look at gender-based violence, look at when we talk about economic justice and so forth. So those are some of the things that what transformational feminist leadership does. It challenges us to have those so many asks so many questions that we need to analyze our systems. We need to analyze our ways of being. We need to analyze how we behave and how we see things. And I think it's a time, an opportunity for us, especially as women, to come together as a collective and drive that change. Because many a times, if you look at decision making spaces, women are not there. They are few, and even if they are few, you'd realize that within those spaces, they're not listened to. Sometimes it's just women are just there for us to tick the boxes. But what sort of leadership do we want? We want a leadership that is able to bring about change, is able to shift um, power imbalances, is able to say, you know what, I'm ready, I'm here, let's have that uncomfortable conversation. If it's accountability, if it's transparency, if I'm being toxic, if it's about changing policies and so forth, and ensuring that at the end of the day we embrace people in their diversities. It's not enough to say, oh, we need women in these spaces, but we also need to have that intersectional analysis, that intersectional approach, and say that women in their diversities, many a times you'd realize that women, uh, depending on their sexuality, depending on their age, depending on their class, they're marginalized. So transformational feminist leadership says that we need to put that lens and ensure that in our journey of decolonizing our systems, our structures, we're also able to articulate those issues of power imbalances. We're also able to articulate those issues on how then do we also bring in more people on the table of decision making, and so forth. And this is an opportunity, especially for us as women, to galvanize our efforts, to come together and say, you know what, we can bring about the change that we really want to see. I mean, look at the women that responded to HIV and AIDS, look at the women that responded to Ebola. They did it. Even in terms of COVID-19 last year, if you look at the different governments or the member states that really performed well, you'd realize that most of them were led by women. And if you look at the health workers, the majority are women. So it's a time for us to galvanize our efforts. It's a time for us to come together as a collective and bring about the change that we really want to see. And that change has to be premised on the feminist principles. I think for me, that's what I can say with regards to this conversation. It's a conversation that needs to continue happening because there are also other emerging things that keep on coming. And it also requires us to be innovative in terms of our approaches. Innovative in the sense that we bring the new and also we bring the old together and see how best we can articulate the different challenges that we are facing as a whole. Yeah, thank you so much.